All right, so my name is Jessica Brooks. I'm a hydrologist at Central Region Headquarters. Today I'm going to try to give you a summary of the February 2025 Kentucky flood event and talk a little bit about how FIM was used, so flood inundation mapping was used during that event. So to start off, I'm just going to make an acknowledgement to all of the offices and everyone that was involved in the event, because I really just kind of went and took material from everyone who provided input following the event and compiled it into this presentation today. So everything here is not my own, it's coming from you all. I'm just putting it all together to showcase kind of the great work that you all did in the field over this event. So I will get started here with kind of just a little outline of what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to go over the overview of the event for those of you who may not be familiar with what happened during the flood event in February. Talk a little bit about the messaging, the coordination of mutual aid that was done. Talk about the operations and services that the National Weather Service provided to our partners. Go a little bit on to the staffing and support that were provided to each other. And then get into some of the actual FIM IDSS that was provided and what our partners did with that information. And then leave you with some takeaways that we have come up with so far in this event. So to give you a little overview, and I will say there's a lot of text on a lot of these slides. So when we share the slides with you all later, you can go in and read them. I'm not going to speak to every bullet that's on here, but there's been a lot of information that we've gathered over the last few weeks on this event. So so stay tuned to be able to read all the information on the slides. But anyway, so for the overview, we had a prolonged heavy rain event February 15th and 16th of this year. Widespread rainfall, over 6 inches, impacted most of Kentucky. A lot of the rain fell from Friday night through Saturday. We had a lot of crests on rivers that reached the top 5 crests in their recorded history. We did have some severe weather as well. So on the bottom here just kind of lays out the number of warnings and that were issued during the event. And then there's a link to the web story that was developed to kind of overview this entire event. So this was a very well forecast event. So I'm going to start off looking at the week 2 probabilistic hazard outlook from CPC. So this was what was put out by them, well out from the event with the 8 to 14 day probabilistic risk for heavy rain, highlighting most of Kentucky, or actually this really kind of highlighted all of Kentucky. And then there was also a swath in there that they highlighted as flooding would be possible in that 12th to the 15th time range in that area. Then looking, going into the week prior, just wanted to show the excessive rainfall outlooks that progressed through the week from WPC, showing 5 days out, we had a slight risk across over the state of Kentucky. And then as we progressed into days closer, that got increased to a moderate risk. And then on day 2, a high risk was produced for parts of Western Kentucky for this time frame. So just highlighting that this was, we were seeing that this was going to be a big event, and it was well forecast. So the 48-hour precipitation totals, as I said, it was 2 to 6 plus inches. So the areas in green are around 2 to 3 inches. And then as you get to the west part of Kentucky, you see 5 to 6 plus inches of rainfall were recorded. And then it's kind of hard to see the outline of Kentucky, but you can kind of tell where it is because it's full of reports. So these are all the flash flood and flood reports, the LSRs that were issued by the WFOs during and following the event. So very widespread across the state. And then here's just a listing of the river crests that were in the top 5 of recorded in recorded history for these locations. So, you know, we didn't have any top, but many 2, 3, 4s, and 5s. So this was just showing this was a very, very big, widespread event. So quick talking about the impacts that occurred across the state. There were 10 confirmed fatalities. There were over 1,000 water rescues performed. 40,000 people were without power at times, 9,000 without water. Multiple wastewater systems compromised, which obviously we know that that's a big impact. There were evacuations completed of nursing homes, some apartments. The Jackson WFO did have to shelter in place for several days. Lots of roads closed because they were underwater, mudslides. Shelters were open for people to take shelter in. State parks were closed, and then ultimately 44 counties had disaster declarations declared. So as I said, it was a well forecast event. So what did we do leading up to the event? So this is just kind of a slide highlighting some of those things that were done. So I mentioned the CPC one already, but just also to mention 8 days in advance was the first time the National Water Center mentioned this event in the flood hazard outlook. So that was on February 7th. Then, as I mentioned earlier, 5 days in advance, the ERO had put a slight risk over Kentucky. And this then also on Tuesday, the Water Center escalated the event from limited flooding to considerable flooding potential across Kentucky. And then by Tuesday, all of the Kentucky WFOs were actively messaging this potential for significant flooding. Getting into Wednesday, so 4 days in advance, WPC upgraded to the moderate risk on the ERO for portions of Kentucky and Tennessee. So that's about 90 hours in advance of when we started seeing impacts. Then the outlook, yeah, I guess I got ahead of myself on here a little bit. So 3 days in advance, we go to Thursday. The Ohio River Forecast Center did mention this event coming up on the Greater Mississippi River Basin Spring Flood and Water Resources Outlook webinar. So that just hit, widespread partners across the region and across the country. So that was mentioned there. Once we get to Friday, as I said, the ERO upgraded to a high risk over Western Kentucky. And then just to point out, throughout the week, I mentioned that WFO started messaging this event actively on Tuesday, but that continued throughout the week. Lots of briefings, social media posts, conference calls, webinars were occurring throughout the week. So getting a little bit closer into some of the specific things that were done in preparation for the event. On Tuesday, the Ohio River Forecast Center provided a heads up to the Central Region ROC of what they were expecting. At that point, they started attending the Central Region ROC briefings as for coordination purposes. The Louisville WFO was doing FIM reviews throughout the week prior to the event. I wanted to point out that on Thursday, the Office of Water Prediction was responded to a congressional affairs tasker to provide the importance of stream gauges in the Ohio Valley ahead of this event. So this was coordinated with OHRFC to provide that response back to congressional affairs. And then also the Central Region ROC started up a TikTok document, which was a document where we were able to just have everyone go in and provide any information on the event. It was open to all offices involved, where they provided any relevant information. So including information on their operations they were doing, IDSS, feedback they were getting, concerns. It was all just one document that was able to pull in all information. And that's honestly where I got a lot of the information for this presentation today. So in talking about the FIM reviews that were done in preparation for the event, I first wanted to just kind of point out what the purpose is of a FIM review. You may have heard, that term over the last couple of years as Central Region's been getting into FIM implementation, but just wanted to point out what exactly is being done and what the purpose is of those reviews. So really when somebody's doing a FIM review, they're reviewing the information of the inundation mapping in the area of concern. So what they're doing is looking at what types of inundation mapping is available, if there's any problems, issues with the maps that they need to be aware of. They look at how each type of FIM is performing, and then maybe look at if there's a particular type of FIM that might be more representative than others to use when providing IDSS. So the answers to these questions then helps whoever is providing the IDSS to the partners to know what to say and what to communicate. And then also it just provides those staff members with more familiarity of the area, what impacts may be happening when the flooding occurs. So that's the purpose of the FIM reviews. And just wanted to point out again, like during the week ahead, there were these reviews being completed. The National Water Center Water Prediction Operations Division, so WPOD, they typically will start doing reviews when we're seeing flood forecasts on rivers approaching moderate and major flooding. So they're already looking at that during their operations, but we also had the WFOs and OHRFC putting time into doing these reviews ahead of the event. So looking at what areas are maybe going to be most impacted, where do we need to focus our IDSS work by using these FIMs prior. So said the WFOs were reviewing the FIM, and they did, if they would see areas they needed some additional technical support, they would request those reviews to the WPOD folks. And they could help kind of do that determination if there's a particular type of FIM that would be more representative to use than others. So for instance, I put this example that reviews of Painesville, Kentucky indicated the real-time FIM. So listed those. There's 3 different types that are available. Are all underestimating the inundation. So they recommended to use the stage-based CAT FIM when they were providing IDSS to partners. So moving on from the FIM review section prior to the event, want to talk about the coordination, so mutual aid staffing support that was needed. So the Central Region ROC led coordination calls for mutual aid efforts. So the first call was on February 13th. That was on Thursday. That call was with the ROC, Central Region staff, subject matter experts, along with the expected impacted WFOs, as well as their backup offices. Then on Friday, February 14th, brought in the other triad offices, as well as the Eastern Region ROC into these coordination calls, where they discussed planned mutual aid to be performed during the event, which then would allow the impacted offices to focus on what we saw was important, which was the high impact work for the flooding. So those coordination calls were made, plans were made for who would be doing services for other offices to allow those high impacted offices to really focus on their flooding. Additionally, the Central Region ROC set up an internal Google chat space for event collaboration and support needs. So there were a large number of people in this chat room, but it included the impacted WFOs, the WFOs that were providing mutual aid, both in Central Region and Eastern Region. OHRFC was in the room, Central Region Headquarters, SMEs, Central Region ROC, Eastern Region Hydro Support, Eastern Region ROC, Southern Region ROC, and also some SBS folks. So the chat room, and the fact that the chat room was set up early before the event, it allowed people the time to make sure that everyone who needed to be in there and involved and informed was in the room as people were getting added also through the event as that became more clear if someone else should be in there. But this was a space that was really allowed everyone involved in the event to be able to communicate well. You knew everyone was on the same page, and it proved to be very successful. So anyway, that was set up prior to the event. So then we just wanted to show a map of what mutual aid was set up. So again, the impacted offices were Paducah, Louisville, and Jackson. So we had kind of a plethora of offices helping them out. We had potential backup hydro operations ready from these offices over here in Eastern Region and in Central Region, and also Indianapolis, but a lot of the work was being done by Springfield, Pleasant Hill, and Davenport provided some help to Paducah as well. And then aside from the other WFOs helping out, we had someone from WFO Bismarck provided help creating the web page. So the web page I listed earlier in the presentation, he put that together. We had people providing remote mesoanalysis help, and then the National Water Center provided the FIM reviews. So this was a kind of all hands on board type of event where we had lots of help, and that again proved to be very successful. So moving into the event itself, talking about the internal collaboration and support. So warning services and IDSS were obviously the focus of what was being done. But there was extensive use of FIM provided in those IDSS services. The WFOs and RFCs, as the rain was falling and warnings were being issued, they had limited capacity to be, performing any FIM reviews. So they used the ReachPack support from the Water Center at the WPOD group. So how that would work was the WFOs would ask questions, provide requests for any technical information they were needing, and asking for additional FIM reviews to be done to the Water Center. OHRFC provided information on forecast changes on the rivers. They also provided some of that technical support for the FIM while they weren't necessarily sitting down and doing the reviews themselves. They were still in the mix, providing a lot of great information. So the FIM reviews are really being conducted by the Water Center as forecasts were updated and as more information was needed from the WFO. Then as those folks were doing those FIM reviews, they were sharing and highlighting areas that the WFOs should be paying attention to while they were performing their IDSS. The ROC also took the work of being another set of eyes to look through what the reviewers were seeing to ensure that the WFOs were seeing all the great beneficial information coming from those FIM reviews. So the aside from the Google chat space, there's also a chat room in Slack. It's the National Water Center FIM Slack channel. That's where the Water Center provides a lot of their information that they're looking through as they're doing the FIM reviews. And on this screen, you see a couple screenshots I took of some of that coordination that was occurring during the event as our offices were talking back and forth regarding those FIM reviews. And then I also wanted to mention that the National Water Center's Geointelligence Division, they also were working through the event, monitoring the National Water Model and the FIM output to make sure there was no disruption in service, as they knew that FIM was being used extensively through the event. Some additional information on some of the IDSS that was provided to partners. As we knew this was a high event coming in, the Weather Service did provide messaging using probabilistic data prior to the event, well, or as maybe the rain was starting to fall, as what the impacts and levels were going to be, like 3 to 5 days out, as the state of Kentucky was making resource placement decisions at that 3 to 5 days out from the impactful river levels. So as they were making those decisions, this was some of the IDSS we were providing. We were gathering real-time observations and impacts to share with our partners. Our WFOs were in constant contact with emergency managers, local media, and other partners through briefings, slide decks, verbal communication, and NWS chat. Did want to point out, so this is really the first big event we've had where FIM was used extensively in Central Region. We had one other event last November, but it wasn't used as much during that event. So as this is one of the first times we've really used FIM, the Louisville office wanted to ensure that their partners knew what this was. So they did put slide packets together, shared with their EMs, and then provided follow-up calls to explain what they were seeing in the slides that they were getting. So they knew what they were looking at, and they knew then to reach back to the WFO if they had questions about what they were seeing in the FIM. And then also Central Region ROC fast-tracked weather summary to FEMA Region 4 to ensure that they were able to get rapid federal assistance to the state of Kentucky. A few other things to mention. As you see is in the kind of the bolded big print here, one of the key lessons learned was you may have an established playbook, but ultimately you're adapting to meet what your partner's needs are. So we can't go into an event thinking this is exactly how we're going to provide FIM services to our partners and that it's going to be the same every time, because it likely will not be. We found that the expertise that we have, that our staff has in the weather, hydrology, and FIM were really critical in allowing our partners to make the decisions they needed to make, to deploy resources, issue evacuation orders, and anything else they needed to make decisions on. They really relied on our expertise for that. And some specifics here, the Jackson office provided FIM information to give them a list of vulnerable locations that they were seeing on the inundation maps that they could check into. The Louisville office provided instrumental, excuse me, information to help the state determine where they needed to allocate their resources, what evacuation routes to use, who they need to evacuate. Slides were provided, but the WFO said they made lots of phone calls and received lots of phone calls, and that they did a lot of their DSS, verbally through impromptu briefings. So just showed the need to be able to communicate clearly and well, and to understand how to communicate FIM information verbally, not just through, say, a slide deck. To get into the staffing and staffing support a little more, the big thing was that mutual aid allowed our impacted WFOs to focus on the flood event as their routine tasks were removed from their ongoing duties and taken on by others. So this also permitted them to not only just focus on the flood event, but more of their staff were available to be able to work the flood event. The Louisville office found it beneficial that, leading up to the event, they were able to do FIM reviews those days prior. They did point out that they still could have used another person on each shift. And then one recommendation was that if you're in a flood event using FIM, it is recommended to have at least at least two, at a minimum, two people working on FIM in your office. So you would need one to really work on the technical side, collaborating with the RFC and the Water Center, and then another person to take incoming requests and provide the IDSS to partners. Here's just a listing of some of the product services, decision support provided to our partners during the event. So again, highlighting that we were starting to talk about this 8 days in advance. We issued a total of 177 flash flood warnings across the area during the event, with good lead time of 121 minutes for each flash flood warning. We had forecasters deployed at the Kentucky State Emergency Operations Center for 24-hour support, and also had forecasters from the Jackson office at the Incident Command Post in London, Kentucky. So that's just a listing of some of the work that was done. Now, post-event, just want to make sure you all know the FIM is just as important post-event as it was prior to and during the event by our partners. The state EOC in Kentucky really needed the inundation maps as they were working through their search and rescue and recovery efforts. So to get the mapping that they needed, they worked together with the Water Center WPOD group to obtain the FIM that was providing the output they were looking for, so they can use that as a resource as they were doing their work. Also in post-event, the Central Region ROC gathered information regarding the event to document and review what occurred. And just to point out, data collection is continuing today to help with verification efforts during the event. There's a few highlights of some of the decisions partners were making during the event. Just showing that FIM was used to provide the information to the partners so they can make decisions on evacuating people, how they prepared for the flooding to come. It was just used extensively, and I think a quote from Mike, who was at the state EOC, was that FIM was a hit to all of our partners working there. So that you can all read through that when we send the slides out. This is again just another slide saying some of the actual actions that were completed based on information being provided by the Weather Service. Again, talking about evacuations, setting up search and rescue units, dispatching aircraft to provide support, etc. So lots of good stuff on there. And then to just, there's a couple slides here just talking about how flood inundation mapping is really a game changer. We learned from this event. Our partners really want it. It was very helpful to them. So we really need to lean in moving forward for flood events to be able to use this as a tool for providing IDSS to our partners. So in this slide, talking about the Jackson office, who identified an apartment complex that may get inundated. So residents were evacuated in a timely fashion, and those areas did in fact take on water during the event. This one is just some quotes from some of our partners. It helped them identify areas that we're going to see structural flooding versus those that wouldn't. And here's where we got the quote that this is truly a game changer for their operations, and they're excited to work with us on this in the future. So just a couple more slides. I'm just about done here. Working with, these are some identified outcomes from the offices that went through the event. We'll be putting together more, I'm sure, as we continue to talk, but these are some of the things that have been identified this far. Working at the EOC, we're representing the National Weather Service, not your office. So always looking for ways to be more efficient. And speaking of efficiency and knowing how to communicate FIM was found to be something that is very much needed. And also having access and the understanding of how to use the WaterView and FIAT tools that are being used for FIM work. As I said before, recommendation of a minimum of 2 people working FIM, 1 to work with partners, and respond to questions and watch the chats, and another to work on the technical work with RFCs and WPOD. We always hear this, you can always use more people. One identified best practice is to develop an organized method to share information between all people working the event on what areas have FIM reviewed. So mentioned the Slack room that the Water Center has. That's where they're posting when they're doing reviews. But also if others are doing reviews, just said it would be a best practice to have another place to organize all that information. The Jackson office did develop a spreadsheet during the event that they did that, and the group kind of decided that would be something we could do for the next event. So that could be more widely used. Someone had mentioned that Savvy would be something that could be developed out more in Central Region and used to help identify FIM or inundation impacts during a flood event. The Kentucky flood event chat room was extremely helpful for coordination and communication. And again, the ability to communicate FIM verbally was found to be very crucial, as again, I mentioned a lot of their IDSS was being performed, through phone calls. And then for some of the main takeaways that I wanted to mention today was, we're one National Weather Service. We really need to lean in with mutual aid, as that allows us to focus on what's most important. So in the aftermath of this event, looking back at it, having the staff focusing on what's most important really resulted in our ability to provide targeted, detailed, and tailored information to our partners, gave us the ability to provide more time for one-on-one partner interaction. It resulted in us providing more DSS packets, graphics to partners and the public to help save lives and property. It allowed us to focus on timely updates to our forecasts, and then also to have the availability to have meteorologists staffed the Emergency Operations Center and the incident command posts in the state. So just to mention, we are continuing efforts to gather input and feedback right now. We actually have a meeting tomorrow scheduled with the offices as we're just walking through the event more and seeing what we can find as best practices and things we can put together to provide more support in the future for additional events. So there will likely be more to come from this, and any of you that get involved in FIM will be beneficiaries of that. So again, just want to acknowledge everyone who's put all the information together that I was able to use in this summary today. And I will take any questions if anybody has any.